No one is irreplaceable, Caleb, especially you. This company will function perfectly well without your name.
You're so confident, especially since you haven't checked the date. Don't miss what happens next.
They called me into the conference room at 4:46 on a Friday afternoon, which was how I knew this wasn't good news. No one schedules promotions at 4:46 on a Friday. The room smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee, too clean, too quiet. Across the table sat Ethan Caldwell, the newly appointed operations director, his tablet already open, his hands folded like this was a rehearsed performance. Beside him was Lydia Moore from HR, wearing that neutral expression, HR people perfect when they're about to dismantle your life politely. Caleb. "Thank you for coming in," Ethan said, not looking at me. "We'll keep this brief." That's when I saw the folder. Thin, white, my name printed neatly on the corner. "We're making some organizational changes," he continued. "Your role is being eliminated. Effective end of business today. End of business today." I nodded once. Slowly. My heartbeat didn't race, it sank. 10 years. 10 years minus 1 day. Tomorrow was my anniversary, the day my equity cliff completed. $4.5 million in shares, earned 1 calendar day at a time, finally becoming fully mine at midnight. I'd counted that date for a decade. I'd built my life around it. "That's unfortunate timing," I said calmly. Ethan shifted. "This decision has nothing to do with timing. It's a strategic realignment following the Meridian Systems acquisition." I almost laughed. I had personally led that acquisition integration, rebuilt half their infrastructure, fixed the authentication architecture no one else could touch. My fingerprints were in the code base, the security models, the patents, but I said nothing. Lydia slid the folder toward me. "HR will email your separation agreement shortly." Of course they would. Prepared in advance. I packed my desk under supervision. 10 years reduced to a box, a chipped mug, a notebook full of diagrams no one else understood. My badge was deactivated before I reached the elevator, in the parking garage. My phone buzzed. A message from my attorney. Rachel Stein. Just 3 words. Midnight still counts. I sat in my car for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, realizing something important. They thought they had fired me in time. They were wrong. Wherever you are right now. I hope this story found you at the right moment. If your mind feels heavy, try this: open a window or step onto your balcony and let your eyes rest on something far away. For 1 full minute, it helps your brain reset more than you'd expect. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel, and if this moment resonates with you. Stay with me, subscribe quietly, because what happens next is where everything begins to turn. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the parking lot of North Shore Analytics, watching people leave with backpacks and weekend plans, watching the building lights shut off floor by floor like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been erased with a sentence. At 5:12 p.m., my phone vibrated. An email from HR, time-stamped 5:04. They'd been ready. The separation agreement was 12 pages long, dense with polished legal language meant to feel generous and final. 6 months. Severance. Benefits extension. A non-compete that would quietly end my career if I signed without thinking. I didn't panic. Panic was what they were counting on. I scrolled. Page 7, Section 8, Subsection C, employee acknowledges that termination prior to vesting date results in forfeiture of all unvested equity. I smiled, but only for a second, because I wasn't reading their interpretation. I was reading my contract, 10 years earlier, fresh out of a startup collapse that had wiped out everyone below the executive level. I had paid Rachel Stein to read every word before I signed. 3 hours, red pen, no trust. She had changed dozens of clauses most people skimmed past. One of them was equity vesting. Their standard language said end of business day. Rachel crossed it out and wrote calendar day. Then added a handwritten note in the margin: vesting occurs at 0 hours on anniversary date, regardless of employment status. Their lawyer initialed it. Nobody ever questions calendar language when things are going well. I drove home in silence, no music, no calls, just the sound of tires and the slow realization settling in. At 11:58 p.m., I opened the equity portal. The interface lagged, as if it wanted to make me wait just a little longer. My cursor hovered. I refreshed. The page updated. 1,620,000 shares. Fully vested. Value $4.5 million. I didn't celebrate. I documented screenshots, timestamps, PDFs downloaded and saved in 3 places. I emailed everything to Rachel with a single line. It vested. She replied less than a minute later. Perfect. Do not respond to them. Monday is ours. Saturday felt unreal. I folded laundry knowing my life had split into a before and after at midnight. Sunday was worse. The waiting pressed against my chest. At 8:21 p.m., an email arrived from Ethan's assistant, politely reminding me to return the signed agreement by close of business Monday. They were trying to trap me into acknowledging something that no longer applied. Monday morning. My phone started ringing at 9:04. I didn't answer. Because the moment they fired me to save money, the shares stopped belonging to them, and they just hadn't realized it yet. By Monday morning, I already knew something had shifted. My phone kept vibrating on the kitchen table, screen lighting up again and again while I let it sit there untouched. I made coffee I didn't drink. Outside, traffic moved like any other weekday. Inside my inbox, the tone was changing. The first voicemail was from Ethan Caldwell. His voice was polite, measured, and just a little too careful. Caleb, we need to clear up a few things related to your separation documents. Please call me back. Clear up, not resolve, not correct. Clear up. A second voicemail followed shortly after, this time from a number I didn't recognize. The man introduced himself as Martin Hale, General Counsel for North Shore Analytics. His voice carried the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed. He spoke about interpretation, about mutual understanding, about reaching an amicable resolution. I didn't call back. Rachel rang me instead. They've escalated. She said, legal only steps in when someone realizes the numbers don't work in their favor. What are they going to try, I asked. First, they'll argue intent that no reasonable person would read the contract the way we do. Then they'll suggest it was a drafting mistake. And if that fails, they'll try to settle quietly. I refreshed the equity portal again. The shares were still there, fully vested, untouched. As the morning turned into afternoon, the language sharpened. Emails warned me not responding could be seen as uncooperative. Another reminded me I was still bound by confidentiality policies. One even suggested that my access to certain records might be reviewed. Then the offer arrived. A formal email, a PDF attached, legal letterhead. They were willing to settle for $1.6 million, contingent on a full release of claims and a strict confidentiality agreement. The message framed it as generous, final, time-sensitive. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her reply came back immediately. Ignore it. This is pressure, not leverage. I sat there longer than I expected, staring at the wall, thinking about how carefully they must have planned my termination, how confident they'd been that I'd panic, sign, and disappear. That confidence cracked an hour later. A message came through from Jonah Price, someone I'd worked with for years but never closely. They fired you right before vesting. Didn't they? Same thing happened to Maya. She didn't fight, lost a lot. My chest tightened. I called Rachel again and read the message aloud. There was a long pause on the line. If this has happened before, she said quietly, then this isn't a misunderstanding. What is it? Then a pattern. She replied, and patterns leave evidence. I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear, finally understanding why the calls felt frantic. They weren't trying to negotiate anymore. They were trying to contain something that was starting to leak. And once it did, it wouldn't be just about me. If you're someone who looks deeper than most, don't leave. This next part is for you. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, more from the slow, grinding realization that what happened to me hadn't been accidental. It had been rehearsed, repeated, refined. By morning, Rachel was already moving, quietly, methodically. She didn't call the company, she didn't threaten, she started calling people, former engineers, project leads, anyone who had left North Shore Analytics under restructuring in the past few years. The first confirmation came faster than I expected. Maya Chen, senior back-end engineer, fired days before her vesting milestone. She had been offered a settlement and told politely that fighting would take years. She signed. Then Oliver Grant, infrastructure architect. Similar timing, different excuse, same result. By the end of the day, there were 4 names. Each one followed the same pattern: long tenure, significant equity approaching vesting, sudden organizational change, a quiet settlement wrapped in an NDA. None of them had known about the others. Rachel laid it out for me without drama. This isn't a rogue manager, she said. This is policy disguised as coincidence. That word stuck with me. Policy. Somewhere inside North Shore, someone had decided it was cheaper to fire people early than honor what they'd earned. And once you do that twice, you don't stop. You build a system around it. Templates, talking points, a legal playbook. The next move came from Rachel, not them. She filed a formal demand not just for my equity, but alleging wrongful termination and bad faith execution of equity agreements. The letter didn't accuse, it documented. Dates, roles, parallels. She also reached out carefully to the others. NDAs, she explained, don't protect illegal conduct. Silence doesn't erase patterns, and fear fades when people realize they weren't alone. Responses trickled in, then accelerated. One engineer admitted he'd always felt something was wrong, but assumed he was unlucky. Another said she'd been warned not to overthink the timing. One had emails he never deleted. Rachel didn't react outwardly, but I could hear it in her voice. Calm, sharpened into precision. They kept records. She said, "People like this always do." That evening, my phone buzzed again. This time. It wasn't a colleague. It was an email from North Shore's legal department. Shorter. More careful. They wanted to revisit the situation. They were open to discussion. They suggested a call. Rachel read it once and smiled. They've realized this isn't staying quiet, she said, and now they're afraid of what we'll find next. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling something unfamiliar, not anger, momentum. Because the moment other names entered the story, it stopped being about a single employee and a single mistake. It became about exposure. And companies fear exposure more than they fear paying money. North Shore didn't respond with another offer. They responded with force. Rachel called me early the next morning, her voice steady but alert. They've decided to go on offense, she said, which means they're scared. An hour later, the filing appeared, a formal complaint, thick, aggressive, written to intimidate more than to persuade. They were accusing me of breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of confidential information, and something almost laughable, fraudulent intent at the time of hiring. According to them, I'd manipulated my employment contract years ago with the long-term goal of extracting equity I didn't deserve. I read the document slowly, sitting at my kitchen table, feeling something cold move through my chest. They had taken my emails about system architecture and reframed them as suspicious. Performance reviews were twisted into evidence of strategic positioning. 10 years of work had been rewritten as a scheme. They weren't just trying to avoid paying me. They were trying to make me look like the villain. Rachel arrived that afternoon with a legal pad and 2 cups of coffee. She didn't look angry. That worried me more. This is textbook, she said. When companies realize the facts won't save them, they attack character. They want you shaken, isolated, desperate enough to settle, It feels like they're trying to erase me. I said. They're trying to control the narrative, she corrected. But they just made a serious mistake. She explained it carefully. By filing this suit, North Shore had opened the door to full discovery, internal emails, executive messages, legal discussions, anything related to equity timing, terminations, restructuring strategy. They didn't want this, Rachel said. They wanted pressure without exposure. But now they don't get to choose. Over the next few days, her team began receiving documents. I wasn't allowed to see most of them yet. But Rachel's tone changed every time she called. Words like problematic gave way to damaging, then to remarkable. Finally, one evening, she called and didn't bother easing into it. They planned it. She said, in writing. There were emails, conversations between leadership and legal, discussions about upcoming vesting cliffs, suggestions on timing terminations to minimize equity payouts. Not just about me. Others too. They didn't hide it well, Rachel added. They assumed no one would ever look this closely. I sat down, suddenly aware my legs felt weak. For years, I'd believed what happened to others was bad luck, poor timing, corporate indifference, but this wasn't indifference, it was design. Rachel paused before speaking again. From this moment on, we're not negotiating anymore. We're dictating terms. I stared at the wall, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, understanding something fundamental had shifted. They had tried to flip the story. Instead, they had handed us the evidence to end it. The next part is only understood by the truly observant. Don't miss it. The lawsuit didn't last long. It couldn't not after discovery began to surface what North Shore never expected anyone to see. Rachel didn't send me documents, but she didn't need to. The way she spoke told me everything. Shorter sentences, sharper pauses, less speculation, more certainty. They're retreating, she said during one call. Quietly. Which means the board has been briefed. That mattered more than anything else. Executives can gamble. Boards don't like surprises. Within days. The tone from North Shore changed again. The accusations disappeared from their emails. The language softened. No more deadlines, no more threats. Just one carefully worded request. They wanted a meeting. Neutral location. Private conference room. No court reporters, no press, just representatives. Rachel agreed on conditions. When we walked into the room, the atmosphere felt different from the moment I sat down. This wasn't confidence. It was containment. Across the table sat Martin Hale, 2 outside attorneys, and 1 board liaison whose name I didn't recognize. Ethan Caldwell was there too, though he barely spoke. Martin did the talking. After reviewing internal communications, he said carefully, we believe there may have been errors in how certain employment decisions were executed. Errors. Rachel didn't react. She simply slid a folder across the table. Inside were excerpts, highlighted, time-stamped, email threads discussing vesting schedules, notes about cost exposure, a message referencing my anniversary date directly. Martin's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. We'd like to resolve this efficiently, he said, without further escalation. Then you'll need to start by withdrawing the complaint, Rachel replied. In writing. Today? A pause. And you'll need to acknowledge full vesting of Caleb's equity, she continued, at the value stated. Another pause. And, she added, this isn't just about him anymore. That was the moment the board liaison leaned forward. What would resolution look like, he asked. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Full transfer of Caleb's shares. Severance as originally promised. Legal fees covered. A neutral reference. And revisions to your equity policies so this can't happen again. Silence. And compensation discussions with the other affected employees. Rachel finished. You'll reach out. Not us. Ethan finally looked up. He looked smaller than I remembered. This could be expensive, someone muttered. Rachel nodded. Not as expensive as letting a jury read your emails. No one argued after that. When the meeting ended, nothing was signed yet, but the fight was over. I could feel it. They had shifted from denial to damage control, walking out of that building. I felt lighter than I had in months, not because I'd won, but because they had stopped pretending. And once a company stops pretending, the truth moves fast. The final agreement didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, as if North Shore hoped that by lowering its voice, it could lower the weight of what it was conceding. Rachel forwarded me the draft late in the evening. 17 pages, clean language, no accusations, no justifications, just outcomes. The lawsuit against me would be withdrawn in full. No conditions, no revisions. My equity, every share would be transferred immediately upon execution of the agreement, valued at the current internal price. The severance terms I'd been offered originally would stand. Untouched, legal fees covered, benefits extended, a neutral reference letter drafted and approved by both parties. And then there was the section that mattered most to Rachel: policy revisions. North Shore agreed to amend its equity vesting language to remove ambiguity entirely. Vesting would occur at the start of the anniversary calendar day. Retroactive review would be applied to employees terminated within a defined window prior to vesting events. They also agreed quietly to reopen conversations with the others. No admissions of wrongdoing, no public statements, but money where money was owed. I read the document twice, then a third time more slowly, not because I didn't trust Rachel, but because 10 years of conditioning had taught me to expect traps. There were none. We signed the next morning. No ceremony, no handshake, just digital signatures and a brief confirmation email from Martin Hale acknowledging receipt. An hour later, Rachel called. "It's done," she said. "Check your account." I opened the brokerage app with a steadiness that surprised me. I'd imagined this moment for years, how it would feel when the numbers finally appeared. When waiting stopped being hypothetical, the balance refreshed. There they were. The shares sat under my name, no longer conditional, no longer theoretical, no language attached, no cliff ahead, just ownership. I didn't smile right away. Instead, I sat there, letting the stillness catch up with me. 10 years of work had resolved into a line item. 10 years of patience had turned into leverage I hadn't needed to raise my voice to use. Later that afternoon, an internal memo circulated at North Shore. I heard about it from Jonah, short, carefully worded. It announced leadership realignment and upcoming policy updates. No names, no explanations. But people understood. A week later, Ethan Caldwell resigned. No farewell message, no send-off, just gone. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was something quieter and heavier. Relief. Not because I'd won money, but because the thing they'd tried to take the value of my time had been returned. And once time is acknowledged, power changes hands. The calls didn't come all at once. They arrived one by one, spaced out, hesitant like people testing whether it was finally safe to speak. The first was from Maya. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't congratulate me. She just said, "I heard you didn't sign the NDA." I told her I hadn't. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she exhaled, a sound I recognized immediately, the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding in for years. I thought I was the only one. She said, "After that." The pattern repeated. A former data architect who had been restructured weeks before his vesting date, a product lead who had been told her role was misaligned right as her equity matured. Different teams, different managers, same ending. Each story carried the same quiet shame, the same self-doubt. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I waited too long. Maybe it was my fault. It never was. What struck me wasn't the anger in their voices. It was the relief. Relief at finally having a name for what happened. Relief at knowing it wasn't coincidence or incompetence. It was a system. Inside North Shore. The ripple was visible even from the outside. 2 senior engineers resigned within a week. One declined a promotion publicly. Another requested a copy of their employment agreement, something no one ever did before. HR scheduled policy clarification sessions. Leadership sent messages about transparency and trust. Too late. When systems rely on silence, the first person who speaks changes everything. Rachel forwarded me an update midweek. The company had reached out to several former employees to revisit prior agreements. No announcements, no press, just quiet corrections. Money moving where it should have moved years earlier. Containment, Rachel called it. They're trying to stop this from becoming precedent, but precedents don't ask permission. One evening, as the city lights flickered on outside my window, I realized my phone hadn't buzzed in hours. No emails, no calls, no deadlines. For the first time since the firing, the noise had stopped. In its place was a strange stillness, not empty, not peaceful, just open. I thought about the version of myself who had sat in that conference room, nodding calmly while they tried to erase 10 years with a sentence, about how easy it would have been to sign, to walk away quietly, to tell myself that fighting wasn't worth the stress. That version of me would still be counting time. Instead, time had stopped counting me, and when I finally shut my laptop and leaned back in my chair, I understood something simple and unsettling. They hadn't been afraid of me. They had been afraid of what would happen if enough people realized they could say no. I didn't attend the board meeting. I didn't need to. By the time it happened, the outcome was already moving beneath the surface, like a fault line finally giving way. The meeting was described to me later in fragments by Jonah, by a former manager, by someone in finance who had started returning calls again. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a long agenda, delayed questions, and a noticeable absence of confidence. The board didn't argue about what had happened. They argued about how long it had been happening, about why legal hadn't escalated sooner, about how many agreements had been quietly resolved before anyone asked whether they should have been. They asked for numbers. Finance hesitated. That hesitation told them everything within days. North Shore announced a review of executive decision-making related to equity compensation. The language was carefully neutral, but no one missed the implication. External consultants were brought in. Internal approvals were frozen. Hiring slowed. The machine that had once moved smoothly now paused at every step. Unsure who was watching, Ethan Caldwell's resignation wasn't framed as a consequence. It never is. It was described as a personal decision, but no one believed that either. He hadn't planned to leave. He'd planned to be promoted. Martin Hale followed not long after, citing early retirement. His farewell message thanked the company for years of collaboration. It didn't mention the emails. The real shift, though, wasn't visible on paper. It was in behavior. Managers stopped using vague language. HR stopped rushing signatures. People started asking for things in writing and waiting for answers instead of accepting reassurances. Fear had changed sides. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a board liaison I recognized from the settlement meeting. His tone was polite, almost cautious. "I wanted you to know," he said, "that corrective actions are being taken." I didn't ask for details. I also wanted to say this. He added, "What you did forced us to look at practices we should have questioned years ago." I thanked him and ended the call, not because I felt vindicated, but because the conversation was over. That night, I walked through my neighborhood without direction, hands in my pockets, letting the air cool my thoughts. For years, I'd believed power was loud, that it announced itself through titles and decisions and authority. I'd been wrong. Power was quiet. Power was waiting until the moment you didn't have to explain yourself anymore. As I turned back toward my apartment, I understood that North Shore's collapse wouldn't make headlines. There would be no scandal, no expose, just a slow erosion of trust that no policy rewrite could fully repair. And that was enough. Because companies don't fall when they lose money. They fall when people stop believing them. in the end. Nothing exploded, no headlines, no public reckoning, just a quiet return of balance. The shares stayed where they belonged, the calls slowed, then stopped. North Shore continued operating, a little more cautious, a little less certain of itself. Life moved on the way it always does, subtly, without asking permission. For the first time in years, my calendar was empty. No milestones circled in red, no dates to survive, no cliffs waiting to see if I'd be allowed to keep what I'd earned. I woke up without calculating risk. I slept without rehearsing conversations that might never happen. People still ask me how it felt winning like that. I tell them the truth. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like being acknowledged. There's a difference. Winning is loud. Acknowledgement is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in and changes how you stand in the world. I didn't start a company. I didn't chase revenge. I didn't try to teach anyone a lesson. I helped a few people read their contracts more carefully. I answered calls when they came. I said no when it mattered. That was enough. What stayed with me wasn't the money. It was the realization that power doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience and from knowing exactly when you no longer need permission. If you've ever been told to wait your turn, to be grateful, to trust the process, remember this. The process isn't neutral. It's built by people, and people make choices. So can you. And sometimes, the most decisive move you'll ever make is simply refusing to sign and letting silence do the rest. I didn't learn this lesson in a classroom or from a book. I learned it sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at a contract I almost signed just to make the discomfort end. What stayed with me wasn't the legal victory or the number on a screen. It was the moment I realized how easily silence can be mistaken for weakness. For years, I believed loyalty meant patience, that keeping your head down would somehow protect you. But real life doesn't reward patience blindly. It rewards awareness. It rewards the courage to pause when you're being rushed and to ask, quietly, why now? What surprised me most was how human the aftermath felt. There was no rush of triumph, just relief, followed by clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't chasing revenge. I simply felt present again, like I had stepped back into my own life instead of waiting on the sidelines for permission. That's the part no one talks about. Reclaiming your sense of self is sometimes more powerful than any outcome, if you're still here with me. I'm glad you stayed to the end, because stories like this aren't really about contracts or companies. They're about moments when you choose yourself without making a speech about it. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Different places, same questions. I think if this story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like or a share helps these stories reach people who might need them more than they realize. And if you want to stay with me for more quiet, honest stories like this one, subscribing is a simple way to do that. Thanks for being here.